Top 5 wide receiver buys season long today on the Seagate Blitz. Welcome into the Seagate Blitz podcast. My name is Chris Strasbaugh. It is a beautiful day here in Ohio. Beautiful Sunday afternoon. Thank you for joining me. As I said at the top, I've got my top 5 wide receiver buys season long. I'm talking dynasty. I'm talking redraft, keeper. Any really platform you want to look at, all 5 of these guys fit those molds. And I'm going to get to that here at the other half of the show. But I want to start today's show a little bit differently. And I want to take you back in time. Okay, I want to take you back in time circa 2016-ish. And I want to talk about what I have titled my ode to Esteban. Esteban Juan. You may think, when you hear his name, that this is a guy from not around these parts. Well, that's true. He's not from around these parts. He's from Connecticut. His name is not Esteban Juan. His name is Stephen John. I just call him Esteban Juan. I'm going to take you through how I got into podcasting. And it's really all because of this man. Our paths crossed when he moved from Connecticut to marry up with his beautiful wife and raise a family here in Ohio, and he actually came to work at the company that I still work for. He has since left, but he always had these earpods or earbuds or whatever in his ear, and all the time I'm thinking, he's listening to music or the radio or whatever in his ear, and I'd be talking to him, and he wouldn't be hearing the thing I was saying, and I'm like, hey, I'm snapping my fingers, and we're building houses or whatever, and I'm like, what are you listening to? And he said, oh, I'm listening to a podcast. I looked at him, and I said, what's a podcast? And he looked at me kind of funny. And I was like, I'm serious. I'm just, an old country boy from Ohio. What's a podcast? Keep in mind, it's 2016. I didn't know anything about any of this at the time. He's like, oh, what's... And he was listening to a show a show called The Way I Heard It, hosted by Mike Rowe. And you guys have probably heard of it. It's actually a really cool podcast. Check it out. Not a sponsor, obviously. I'm like, okay, well... what's it all about? And he said, it's podcast is when you go on and you record some stuff and, people listen to it, they stream it and listen to it. So I'm kind of intrigued. I'm like, is there football podcasts? And he said, only thousands. I said, okay. I said, is there fantasy football podcast? He said, only thousands. I said, okay. So, 2016, this gets me off and running in the podcast world. I start listening to a couple of fantasy football podcasts. And he helps me set it up. He gets it on my phone and helps me find, a pod launcher and everything where I can go to listen to a podcast. And he goes, look, what you need to do is you really need to just harness a few that you like. You can't listen to all of them because there's just not enough hours in the week. You have to just kind of hone in on ones you like. And then every now and then you can branch off and listen to one. So I'm like, okay. So I found a couple that I really liked. Well, as time progresses, I'm listening to more and more podcasts, these things called podcasts. And he's listening to podcasts, and we're building houses, for the next couple of summers, next couple of years, actually. And one day, we're building a house at a retirement village here in Ohio, and we started kicking around the idea of creating our own podcast, a fantasy football podcast. Because if you ever have watched NCIS Los Angeles, and the funniest thing I think I've ever seen was Callan, one of the officers, played by Chris O'Donnell, said the only thing that you need to make a podcast is A, a laptop, B, a microphone, and C, a strong opinion. I'm like, well, if we get all those things, we can make our own podcast. So here it is, 2016, and we're kicking the idea around. Now, it's summertime, okay, to keep in mind it's not football season yet, but, I've been playing fantasy long enough to where there's really no off-season for me. But I'm thinking, well, if we're going to get this going, we need to get this going, before the season starts. So we're really trying to come up with how we're going to do this. Because both of us really had zero idea on how to get it started. Well, as fate would have it, Esteban Juan, a.k.a. Stephen Minter, a good friend of mine, very good friend of mine, and we became really close in his time working with me at Archon Builders. His life kind of takes a turn in another direction, and he's studying to become an elder at his church. Now, keep in mind, he's not eld. He's like 10 years younger than me. But he's becoming an elder. So I'm like, well, we need to get this podcast going. And he's like, to be honest with you, I just don't have the time and the energy to focus on a podcast trying to become an elder in my church. I said, okay, no problem. I said, well, if you don't care, I'm just going to take this ball and run with it. And he says, absolutely. You have my blessing. You go for it. So I'm like, okay, now it's just me. Now it's just a one-man show. He's kind of bowed out, doing other things. Totally get that. Now I got to figure out how to do it. Now I got to figure out how to do all of it because I know zero. Okay, he at least had some of the fundamentals and the ideas of how to get it going. I had no idea other than I had a laptop and a very strong opinion. I didn't even have a microphone at the time. So I start going to YouTube and I start watching videos on how to make a podcast. And I'm shuffling through different ways. And I got frustrated because everything I was trying to do, I was getting blocked. It wasn't letting me do this or do that. Like I applied with Stitcher, and they said that I had to have a RSS feed. I didn't know what an RSS feed was. So I'd almost given up. I had spent pretty much every evening for 3 solid weeks trying to figure out how to get this thing going. And I'd almost given up. I'm like, well, everything I'm doing is not working, so I'm just not going to do it. I'm done with it. So I had given up the idea and the thought of having my own podcast because I thought, well, it's beyond me. I'm not smart enough to figure it out. But then all of a sudden, I got an email alert that my podcast had been picked up by Stitcher. Excuse me, not Stitcher. Podbean. Because I had tried to apply to different venues and it wasn't working. So I could podcast directly to Podbean. But then I stumbled across Spreaker, which is still the main resource where I record and publish today's through Spreaker. Spreaker eliminates, they're kind of like the middleman. They eliminate all the problems for you. Once you get into Spreaker, and it does cost, and you pay them your fee every month, they distribute it to different outlets for you. Okay, they grab your RSS feed when you record, and they distribute it out to Stitcher, to iHeartRadio, to Spotify. They distribute it to all these places. YouTube, iCloud. So I'm like, well, this is really cool. Well, I'd already signed up with Podbean. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to crash that. So that's why Podbean's my main source. But all of a sudden, it just clicked. And I'm pretty excited. And I got to tell you, I don't know if you can still find it out there. If you can go back in the annals of time and listen to my very first podcast somewhere, it is very, very raw. Very raw. I was very nervous. I really didn't know what to do, what to say. I put together a small show just to kind of get the ball rolling. And I didn't have a very good microphone. I didn't have the right kind of settings set up to where the sound quality was. You could hear stuff in the background a lot more than you do now and stuff. So the reason I have putting this ode to Esteban at the beginning of my show is because it never would have happened. The Hateful Hitman podcast would have never been born. It would have never have blossomed into the CGAP Blitz podcast had I not been working with Esteban Juan, Stephen Minter, on a job site, and he's listening to something called a podcast. I would have never have went down that road. Now, my following is not huge. I mean, I have several thousand plays under my belt on Podbean, but I don't have the listeners or the following that I'd like to have or whatever. But I don't do this for all that. I do it just because of my strong opinion. It's an outlet to just voice my opinion. And if one person listens or 100 people listen, I appreciate everybody who gives it a shot. I really do. But none of it would have been possible if I hadn't have met some dude from Connecticut who just happened to stumble his way to Ohio to marry someone who was the daughter of someone else who was working for us. So it's funny how life grabs you and twists you, and you just kind of flow with it. So to Stephen Minter, Esteban Juan, I call him, I thank you. You're a good friend. You always have been a good friend, and I'll always appreciate, getting me going in this direction. 5 wide receiver buys season long. This is going to be pretty simple because to me there are 5 that just scream, go get them. Get them, trade for them, draft them, whatever you need to do to make it happen. I'm going to start at the top with the most glaring one, and the other 4 are going to be kind of, I wouldn't say shocking, but maybe a little revealing. And I'm going to go in Dallas, and I'm a Dallas fan. This is not a homer pick, but this screams to me big time year. CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb has it all lined out for him. And I'm not just talking target share, okay? My podcast preaches opportunity. I always have, and I always will. This is more than opportunity for CeeDee Lamb. This is, hands down, the number 1 receiver on this team. Gallup is coming back from an ACL. He's probably not going to be ready week 1. He might not be ready week 4. I love the rookie Jalen Tolbert that they drafted from South Alabama, but he's not going to be that guy. This is his show right now. Okay? Target share, yardage, yards after the catch. Jerry Jones, who typically, he spoke typical Jerry Jones things, said that CeeDee Lamb is better than Amari Cooper ever could possibly have been. Now, I don't know that I exactly believe that because Amari Cooper was, historically one of the better route runners we've seen, in our time of watching and playing fantasy football. But this is CeeDee Lamb's time. It's in his 3rd year now. Okay, he's going to be Dak's guy. Dak's going to trust him. And I do like Tolbert getting sprinkled in, and eventually Gallup will be, back in the mix. James Washington, not a fan. So, I think he's going to rely on Dalton Schultz, and he's going to rely on CeeDee Lamb, and I'm hearing that they're sprinkling maybe, just maybe, a little bit of Tony Pollard out, catching more passes, which would be fantastic if you have Pollard in PPR. But to me, this is CeeDee Lamb's breakout year, and he could just go absolutely bonkers. I love CeeDee Lamb this year. He's my number 1. These really aren't in any particular order, but I think I like CeeDee Lamb to really light it up for you. And I've seen him go as high in the startup He was the number one receiver off the board in a startup league that I did just recently. It went him, and then it went Ja'Marr Chase. Number 2, and this is the counterpart to Ja'Marr Chase, and this is T. Higgins. Now, there's a little bit of a different element here because of having Ja'Marr Chase on the other side. He's going to get more opportunities because Ja'Marr Chase is going to be drawing some of that coverage. You can say, well, Chris, isn't CeeDee Lamb going to draw a lot of that coverage too? Yes, he is, but I think CeeDee Lamb is going to rise above that, and if he is what I think he's going to be, he can compete with any defensive back or safety in the league and win more times than not. T. Higgins can be the Robin to Ja'Marr Chase being Batman, which means opportunity is going to be there. Target share might not be the same as Ja'Marr Chase, but opportunity will be there because of coverages and things like that paying so much attention. Now, we have seen T. Higgins last year really develop and really come into his own, so he's not going to sneak up on anybody. But if you're still able to get him for a reasonable cost, as in like a trade, or if you're able to get him in a startup, this is a fantastic wide receiver 2 with potential wide receiver 1 opportunity. And the sky's the limit for Joe Burrow. You still have Boyd there. You got Chase. They're still going to move the ball. Burrow has all kinds of weapons to throw to. But I love T. Higgins this year, and I have picked him up in several leagues where I wasn't able to either draft him or whatever in previous years. I have drafted him in startups, and I'm looking to draft him in redraft leagues when our redraft leagues take off here in the next month or so. Number 3, and this is a little bit of hypocrisy on my part, I will say. It really is, because I have 2 guys on my list that you normally wouldn't hear me talking about. And throughout course and time, if you've ever listened to my podcast before, I am not a big proponent of Alabama wide receivers. Okay? I'll be the first one to admit it. So this is a little bit of hypocrisy leaning with a little bit of vinegar taste, because maybe I'm going to have to come around on a couple of these guys. And the next 2 guys on my list actually are from Alabama. Number 3 is Jerry Jeudy. The opportunity, like I said, I preach opportunity. The opportunity in Denver is fantastic for him. Russell Wilson going there. This is going to be a cram-it-in-your-face Seattle kind of year. Russell Wilson has some dark horse people talking, Russell Wilson has some people talking dark horse MVP caliber type season if he can get it going. And he can have the kind of year that we think we're going to have. I drafted him in our Devy Sharpshooter League as my number 1 quarterback, hoping, to shock it and win now and get a championship early in that startup dynasty. And I paired him later on with Jerry Jeudy. So I'm not just spouting off players. These are guys that I've taken, an investment in. So I stacked up Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy in our brand new startup Devy Sharpshooter League as one of my quarterback and wide receiver combinations. So I'm buying what I'm selling to you guys out there right now, people, on all of these guys. I love Cortland Sutton as well. And now I did just trade a share of Cortland Sutton in our Chumps League just to move up and get a pick into the second round. I didn't want to get rid of him, but it was for the best. So I love Cortland Sutton too, and I'm not even against KJ Hamler, who's coming back from injury, having a significant role in this offense. Now the quarterback changes everything. I think Denver is going to be a completely different team because of Russell Wilson at quarterback. It's going to make the running backs better. It's going to make the wide receivers better, and Russell Wilson could be better. This Denver offense now is scary good again. Now, I'm not saying it's Peyton Manning good, but I think Russell Wilson has better weapons around him now than Peyton Manning did when Manning was there. Now, Russell Wilson, I'm not saying it's Peyton Manning. Don't go down that road. But this could be a fantastic year. And if you're willing to take a chance on Russell Wilson, even in dynasty startups, okay, knowing you're going to have him for a couple, 2 or 3 years, and you're willing to take that risk. I love the play. I love Jerry Jeudy as my number 3, season-long wide receiver buy. Number 4, Devonta Smith from the Philadelphia Eagles, and this is another one where the hypocrisy is in full effect. The reason I like Devonta Smith is because of A.J. Brown. No longer a Tennessee Titan, now with the Philadelphia Eagles. And look, I was starting to buy into Devonta Smith last year with the Eagles because he was getting into the groove, and there at the last he was really starting to, bloom into a really nice fantasy football and NFL wide receiver. Devonta Smith, and I will say, as I think across the landscape of my fantasy football leagues, I have 0 shares of this guy. Okay, but I still do have a couple. I have a startup, a keeper league, and 2 pretty much redraft leagues, and an auction league to still draft. Okay, I'm no longer out on Devonta Smith. A.J. Brown, much like Jamar Chase, is going to demand a lot of target share from Jalen Hurts. Now, they also are going to have to keep Devonta Smith happy as well. In Tennessee, Julio Jones to me was done before he ever went there. Okay, so I'm not even really factoring him. To me, he is a complete wash and has been for the last several years in fantasy. Maybe not in the NFL because what he did in the NFL was really good. But when A.J. Brown was there with Julio Jones, it was really just a one-man show. You really had one serious threat at the wide receiver position, and Ryan Tannehill targeted A.J. Brown over and over. He had 13 catches a game. That ain't nothing. I mean, it wasn't anything to see him getting 15 to 16 targets and catching 11 to 13 balls. And in PPR, that's money. Now, jump ahead, Philadelphia. Jalen Hurts, this is a big year for him. Okay? I like him way better than I do Tua. I'm not a fan of Tua or anything that's going on down there in Miami right now. But Jalen Hurts could be the real deal. Okay, he could be the real deal. Sometimes it takes quarterback seasons to really get it together. And, now he's got 2 great wide receivers. Young wide receivers. And he's a young quarterback himself. This could be a big year for that Philadelphia offense, and that really hurts to say I'm a Cowboys fan. But Devonta Smith, to me, is a guy who you can get for a solid wide receiver, too, on your team. And these are all guys, other than maybe CeeDee Lamb, because I've seen CeeDee Lamb go high, like I said. A lot of these guys are going to fill that wide receiver 2 role for you. But these guys are solid wide receiver 2s. And maybe even if you're, depending on how you draft, if you go heavy running back, or if you're in a super flex league where you're drafting the quarterbacks a little earlier, one of these guys may end up being your wide receiver 1. Jerry Jeudy, for example, is he's my wide receiver 1 in the league. But don't forget about Devonta Smith just because A.J. Brown is now in Philly. Everybody says, well, he's not the biggest wide receiver. No, he's not. He's not built like A.J. Brown. He's not, but he's a fantastic complement to A.J. Brown. I really think these guys could work great together and be a fantastic 1-2 punch in Philly and just make Jalen Hurts' life a lot easier. If they get their questions answered at the running back position, this Philadelphia offense could be rough, and they could challenge Dallas for the NFC title, or NFC East title, excuse me. I'd like to think they're not that deep yet, and Dallas is still a better team, but this team could give Dallas fits. Okay, and we're not talking about the Giants or the Commanders because they're still a ways away. Commanders probably closer than the Giants. The Giants are still they're a mess. Don't sleep on Devonta Smith. If he's there and you like him as a good, solid wide receiver 2, and oh my goodness, if he's there as a wide receiver 3, oh my, go get that guy. Because if you could get CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, and then come back and get Devonta Smith as a wide receiver 3, I don't know that you can, depending on the league size and the savvy of your league mates. I don't know if that could happen. I think you might be gone, but holy crap, can you imagine? That's a fantastic wide receiving lineup. Number five, this is my last guy from my 5 wide receiver buys for my season long. This is more of a dynasty grab, more than a redraft, because you're not going to draft him. He's probably going to be more of a wide receiver 3 in your mind. That's Christian Watson, rookie wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, and here's my reason why I like this guy. I've already got 2 shares of him early in drafts. And here's my reasoning. Devonta Adams is gone. Okay, and you got a couple of guys there, a couple of veterans there in place that are going to have to step up their game for Green Bay. And we all know that Aaron Rodgers really liked, what he had with Devonta Adams. Somebody's got to fill that role. And it doesn't take a whole lot of film watching to like what you see from Christian Watson. Now, this is more of a draft him now, get in on the ground floor. That's what I got here in my notes. Get in on the ground floor on this guy. Because if he takes off, like he very well could, the price for him in a year or 2 in Dynasty is going to probably be a little bit more than you're willing to pay. Unless you're a huge Green Bay Packer fan and you just love him, you don't care what you have to give up to get him. But get in on the ground floor with this guy. Worst case scenario, it doesn't pan out, and it's fantasy football, and nothing's real anyway. But if it works out, and he's able to spend 10 years, in the league being a big-time wide receiver, and you can get him ground floor. Now, I'm not saying Aaron Rodgers is going to play for 10 years, but he's going to play for a couple, and somebody has to catch the ball, and somebody has to step up and be that guy. Is it Allen Lazard? Maybe. I was in a Twitter group earlier. We were talking about Allen Lazard and best ball. I like that play in best ball. Season long, though, and definitely in Dynasty, I'm taking Christian Watson just for what could be. Get in on the ground floor, get him while he's cheap. Because if it works out, he could be a major weapon in your fantasy seasons, coming up. Maybe as early as this year, maybe more in the future. I really like Christian Watson. So just to recap, my 5 wide receiver buys season long. CeeDee Lamb. Love what he could possibly do this year for Dallas Cowboys. T. Higgins. A fantastic number 2 where Jamar Chase is going to demand a lot of attention from the defense. Jerry Jeudy, breakout season possibly coming in Denver with Russell Wilson on a mission to just throw it in Seattle's face. Devonta Smith, opposite A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, going to get a lot of the attention. Devonta Smith, you could have a big year. Christian Watson, the potential and the upside is there for him to just go completely off and make a name for himself in Green Bay with a future Hall of Famer at quarterback. Write these guys down. Go get them. Do not sleep on them. And do not let somebody else have them. That'll do it. 30 minutes, short and sweet. Hope you like that. Have a great week. Find me on Twitter at Hateful Hitman. find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts. Have a great rest of your Sunday. It's beautiful out. Get outside, cook some burgers, and we'll see you next time on the CGAT Blitz.